Dixie here. Today I want to tell you about a new hammock setup that I just ordered. Before I specifically go into the new hammock setup, I want to tell you a little bit about my history with using hammocks. And for those of you who have seen my hammocking videos in the past and are familiar with this, if you want to skip ahead, you can look in the video description for timestamps. I prefer tenting to hammocking and have been that way for years. My first experience with a hammock was during my thru hike of the AT, and I say during, but it was actually at the very beginning of my thru hike of the AT, where I was new to everything backpacking. That was my first backpacking trip. So to also throw in trying to get familiar with and master hammock camping, because I had never done that before either, was just a lot to bite off. Not to mention that my hammock setup was pretty shoddy. I had an E&O hammock that I had borrowed from somebody that had really heavy straps. I made a Bugnet out of sheer panels because it was cheap, but that was pretty heavy. And then I also made a heavy Rainfly from painter's drop cloth and duct tape. If I'm not mistaken, my whole hammock setup was somewhere between 4 and 5 pounds, and I didn't even have an underquilt. So for multiple reasons, including wanting a lighter shelter and something that I was more familiar with, I switched to a tent when I got to mountain crossings at Neal Gap, which is like your first civilization stop on the Appalachian Trail. But there were other things about hammocking in that first stretch that I noticed I didn't really love, and that was changing clothes. Just not having my own little enclosed bubble, and instead either trying to change while lying in the hammock or under my tarp that was clear, so that didn't help. Also, I found it uncomfortable that I couldn't spread my things out. Like, I just wanted to put them somewhere all spread out, and especially if it's raining while you're hammocking, you just don't have the same protection of all of your stuff spread out that you do in a tent. I put a video out about these opinions after I got done with my AT thru hike, and it was such a culture shock seeing the people's reaction to that video on YouTube. Because in person on the AT, people don't care what kind of shelter you sleep in. They're nice to one another. And then all of a sudden I had all of these hammockers coming at me in the comments, and I think that was my most disliked video that I had ever put out. And I was just like, wow, I did not realize that this culture of hammock online warriors existed, but they came for blood. And you know, it's really okay if you just happen to like different things. But anyway, I decided several years later, because a lot of folks were like, I don't know that you really gave hammocking a fair shake. You know, you had a bad setup, you didn't have a lot of experience in general, so maybe you should give it another go with better gear. So I did that, and for the sake of being still very much a beginner, I decided to select gear from one company. I just wanted a one-stop shop, you know, get everything from this place, so I knew it would all work together. I used that new hammock setup for a stretch of my Pinhoti Trail thru hike to get more familiar with hammocking and to have it in a thru hiking situation. After that experience, which of course was short-lived compared to my experience in a tent, I still definitely preferred tenting, and I wasn't just in love with the setup that I had, although that experience went a whole lot better than my experience on the Appalachian Trail. My biggest hang-up was that my setup was still a good amount heavier than my tent, my Zpacks Duplex. So carrying more weight, even though I do have to admit I got like the best night's sleep that I had ever had on trail in that hammock, it just wasn't quite worth the trade-off to me personally, especially because I tend to carry so much weight in camera equipment. And needless to say, I have been a ground dweller ever since. So why am I suddenly deciding to try out hammocking again? Well, I do want to get more experience with it. I still want to give it, you know, a fair shot. And considering that I'm currently 5 months pregnant, at some point, I imagine my belly is going to get big enough that it's not as comfortable sleeping on the ground, climbing in and out of a tent, and just the whole ground dweller situation. certainly hammocking would be more comfortable, and at that point might be worth the trade-off of being able to spread my things out in my tent and having that little den. So I figured this would be a perfect time to try it out. And this time I went into shopping and purchasing mode with trying to get a setup as lightweight as possible so it's comparable to that of my Zpacks Duplex. That way I can at least eliminate that concern from comparing between the hammock setup and my current shelter. So without further delay, this is what I've selected for my new hammock setup. For the hammock itself, I went with the Hummingbird Hammocks single hammock. It only weighs 5.2 ounces and costs $74. It's apparently made from the same material as skydiving and base jumping parachutes. That was kind of cool to know. So it's designed to be lightweight and thin, but also strong and wind resistant. I also like that it looks like it packs up pretty small and compact, and so anyway, I'm excited to get my hands on it and to try it out. Straps aren't included with this hammock setup, but you can get some pretty lightweight straps from the same Hummingbird hammock company. The straps I decided on have 1-inch tree-safe Dyneema webbing, whoopee slings, and the straps are rated to hold up to 400 pounds. I wanted the straps that weigh 1.55 ounces and they are 100 inches long, but unfortunately those are sold out. So for just over a half an ounce more, I'm getting 152 inches of strap and they weigh 2.33 ounces and cost $55. Because I'm gonna be using this hammock in the warmer months, I feel like a Bugnet is definitely necessary. I might live without it, but it would not be enjoyable. And for comparison, my Zpacks Duplex does have bug protection, so my hammock should also. The same Hummingbird Hammocks company has the Ultralight Warbler Bugnet, and it is a very fine mesh that will protect you against no-see-ums. It weighs 5.5 ounces and costs $40. Finally, for the Rainfly, I selected a Dutchwear tarp. It's the ASIM tarp with Dyneema composite fabric. From the name, you probably can catch that it is asymmetrical. So this is probably gonna be a bit more challenging for my brain when I'm setting it up, and especially in situations with rain or wind when I'm trying to protect myself from that. But I'm definitely gonna practice before I find myself in a situation with that out on a backpacking trip. What really sold me on this tarp is that it's 3.05 ounces. Like, I don't know how they're gonna make things more lightweight than that. This is definitely the most expensive component of my new hammock setup. Because it's gonna be warm while I'm using this hammock, I don't think the underquilt is going to be necessary. I'll probably still have something like a closed cell foam pad to give me a little bit of insulation, but in my Duplex, I would have my inflatable sleeping pad, so those weights are probably gonna be comparable. So this total setup weighs 16.05 ounces and costs $379. As I mentioned before, I really focused on getting the most lightweight components I possibly could for this setup so that it would be comparable to the weight of my Zpacks Duplex. The weight of the current standard Zpacks Duplex is 17.9 ounces and they cost at this time $699. So it's actually slightly lighter than my Zpacks Duplex, but more cost effective. I should mention that they do now make a Zpacks Duplex Light that weighs 14.9 ounces, but even still, it's within an ounce or so of the weight of this hammock setup. So anyway, I am gonna be testing out this hammock probably in a camping scenario when it first comes in, and then I'm hoping to use it a couple more times later in the year before I pop. I'll keep y'all posted on how it works out. That is all I have for y'all today. Thank you very much for watching. I would love to hear your thoughts about this new hammock setup in the comments below, and we will see y'all next time.